We will say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate. Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. The thoughts of those in all parts of the country will be on the events that have taken place in London. At about 2:40 on Wednesday afternoon, a single terrorist drove along a pavement over Westminster Bridge, killing at least 2 people and injuring many more. The car then crashed into railings outside the Houses of Parliament. The attacker, armed with a knife, then ran through the gate where he was confronted and killed by the police. The attack has left families and friends of the victims bereaved, as well as questions about what we should learn from this tragedy. So in today's programme, Rachel will pay tribute to the heroes of such a dark day. Carol says it's time to get tough on those who threaten us. Afua is warning against a knee-jerk reaction. And June will talk about the work of our MPs to keep our democracy strong. But first, it's me. Now, in her first comment standing outside 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister called this a sick and depraved attack. She also said we must all get up and go about our day as normal. And that's exactly what we've all done. This was an attack on the heart of democracy, but it was also an attack on people going about their lives, workers, parents, school children visiting from France. But the response has shown the best of who we are. The police did their very best. The ambulance service did their very best. The public did their very best. The police have now made arrests, and we will soon learn more about the vile attacker. But the most important thing now is that we mourn those who've died, those who've been injured, pray for their families, and keep living our lives.
For once, everyone on the panel couldn't disagree with a single word of that, Nick. Thank you. Yeah. And also, all the statements that we've heard in the House today. I mean, it's less than 24 hours since the atrocity. Yeah. And I think that it's really hard to sum up reaction. Yeah. But I think there is a couple of things that have come out since that's happened. And we're going to leave aside those who've used this as a way of stirring up and hatred within our communities. Yeah. And attacks on multiculturalism. Because I think the big thing that's come out of this is what Theresa May said, is it's united we stand. We've got to go about our everyday. Those wonderful signs on the tubes which say, keep calm and carry on, or those messages for the day. These sum up London and these sum up the British spirit. I'm not going to say Blitz spirit, but this is what is the best of us. Yeah. And I think it's astonishing that we've had such a calm, professional response across the media as well. Nobody's trying to whip up hatred. Everyone's just saying, give this time. And it sort of makes you feel quite proud.
Let's talk about media involvement in a moment. Let's just see, this is a little of what the Prime Minister said when the MPs went back to work.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday an act of terrorism tried to silence our democracy. But today we meet as normal, as generations have done before us and as future generations will continue to do, to deliver a simple message. We are not afraid, and our resolve will never waver in the face of terrorism.
Carol, can I pick up on a little of what Rachel said? And I know you don't want to say Blitz spirit, but there is something about our leaders at times like this. They do say what is required of them. I thought she was first class. I thought Mayor Sadiq Khan hit absolutely the right tone. The media, the right level of coverage too?
You know, there's a lot of people who need to be congratulated yesterday, you know, all the emergency services, the police. But the media, I thought yesterday, were incredibly responsible. You know, I was on Twitter like all the time yesterday and I was watching what they were saying. And what they were doing is telling people not to retweet terrible pictures of the injured. They were saying to people, don't tweet them to each other, tweet them to the police. Let them see what's going on so they can do something about it. And I thought, and I think all of the reporters that I like and respect, all the political guys who are based yards away from there, I think I've never seen it before. They were shocked yesterday in a way that I've not seen before because they were watching it. You know, usually they get there after the event and the report, but they were actually watching it yesterday. Some of them saw that poor policeman stabbed Keith Palmer. But I have to say here, and you know, this is not the day for arguments, it's not the day for scoring political points, or to be on the side. However, when people keep on saying, you know, we mustn't be broken, we mustn't be cowed, we mustn't be afraid, people are afraid. You know, none of us at this table were touched personally by this yesterday. None of us know, you know, Keith Palmer's family. They're devastated, they're broken. Every single one of those people are injured, will be broken for the rest of their lives, physically and mentally, probably. And I think people are broken by this. People are scared, and they have every right to be scared. With what we saw on our streets yesterday, we can talk about that we know it's coming, we can say we expect it, but when it comes, it hits you in the gut. And I think people should be allowed to be scared. You know, it's all very well saying this spirit and we're not going to be broken. This will break some people. This will scare people.
I want to bring Afua into this. It's worth remembering this was 13th time unlucky for the security services. They had successfully foiled 12 attacks, so it's a very high ratio. I hear what you say, but Afua, I could see you shake. You don't think necessarily that people are cowed or fearful?
No, I mean, first of all, I felt that I've never felt Theresa May to be more my leader than when she spoke, saying that we won't be afraid. This is what we stand for as a nation. We're not going to be terrorised to leave our principles and our identity as a country. And personally, that made me proud to hear her speaking in that incredibly dignified and compassionate way, but also reaffirming what I think we are about as a nation. That is the point of terrorism. It is to take away from what we stand for. Now, I hear what
it does. But let's, as Nick said, she has to say that. She has to try and keep the country together. She has to try and make us not afraid. But people walking across that bridge from now on are going to be afraid. Don't roll your eyes, because they will be afraid. It's probably never going to affect you.
If you let me speak, I'll tell you I'm not saying that we shouldn't be allowed to be afraid. And I think one of the important things about an event like this is that people need to be allowed to have the experiencing they're having. There are people who are completely traumatised, who are still in shock. And as you pointed out, you know, usually the press and politicians are external actors who come into events like this to comment and legislate and debate them. This time they were some of the first victims and witnesses. You know, MPs who see PC Keith Palmer every day. You know, my colleagues in Westminster who were locked in the building for hours. All of the MPs who are stuck. So I think that many people are afraid and are shocked. But Carol, I think what we're saying is different.
Today?
We're not.
We're not. Today.
It rocks you.
One at a time.
Carol, it rocks you. You know, and anyone who has friends or family or who saw the school children there feels fearful. But the point I'm making is not that we shouldn't. The point I'm making is not that we shouldn't be allowed to have the reaction that we have, because that is natural, and we all need to process this in our own way. But if you listen, for example, to Joe Cox's husband, you know, who I heard speaking about this, I thought it was very moving to hear what he said. He said at a time like this, what he needed was the focus on the victim, on what happened to his wife, not for us to be making grand political statements or to be whipping up fear and hostility and threat.
I don't think I'm doing any of those. I don't think I am whipping up fear and hostility. What I'm saying is that what scared me yesterday was the fact that this guy, he probably wasn't working on his own, however, he was on his own, and he can do that. What became clear to me was someone like him can do that to this city, anywhere in this country, anytime they want. And that scares the tribe.
Well, you know, the thing I just want to add to what you were saying, Carol, is I think what is so beautiful to see and to sort of add to what Rachel and Afua said is seeing people carry on with their everyday lives today. You know, people are back on the tube, they are back to work, and yes, we're scared, but we also have that defiant spirit that says, you know what, we know we are right. We know our way is the right way, so therefore we will not cow down to terrorism. And I think that is what has been beautiful to just witness.
So I've known you for a long time. You're a robust journo. Do you feel a little broken then by that?
Yeah, I do. I feel a bit broken, because I think this was a defining moment for this country yesterday. For all the reasons you guys have said, but also to show how vulnerable we are. Because no matter how much we talk, no matter how defiant we say we are, the fact remains we are vulnerable now. And we are vulnerable. If one guy can cause that kind of havoc, you know, it's a terrible thing to say in the light of these deaths and these hellish injuries. But the fact is, We were lucky yesterday. This wasn't worse.
I agree with that.
It's this is not Paris.
Carol, don't you think?
It could have been.
But don't you think part of the reason it wasn't worse is because our security services have been brilliant?
It wasn't worse because it was one guy.
No, because actually, if you look at how brilliant our security services have been, it's only this kind of attack that's been able to get through.
Of
the
course.
proper grand plans that have been orchestrated by proper terrorist cells. Our guys have been able to intercede.
Well,
so I
have.
I wanted this to be. I want this to be a nice edition of the pledge, and it is going to be nice. But I sort of feel that have you forgotten the troubles? And have you forgotten?
No, of course not. That's why
I know we're not old enough for the Blitz, but that was when there was real atrocities and real terror on the streets of London.
So this one
I think to say
so
to the viewers that we should be broken by what may turn out to be the act of a lone, self-radicalised jihad. We have no idea who took something as domestic and normal as a car and a carving knife and went across
terrifying.
No, this is what's not terrifying. This is everyday. We have to accept that these are everyday risks. All of us go about our everyday lives, and I like the fact that the Standard said London is open.
I want to bring up. I think where Carol is right. For 1 second, where we are fortunate is if you look at these other vehicle attacks there've been. You look at Nice, it was 86 fatalities. You look at Berlin before Christmas, it was 12. It's ridiculous to say, but by comparison, we are relatively fortunate.
I don't want to be dismissive of what Carol's saying, because it is worrying that these attacks are so hard to detect. I agree, we have possibly the best intelligence service in the world. We don't even appreciate what they've been able to prevent, because it hasn't happened, and it's those things that keep us safe. But the point is, Carol, what I love about this country is that we are reasonable people. We're not a hysterical nation. We resort to reason. We have the ability to be clear-headed. And I find hysterical reactions very worrying. This is not an existential threat. It is a crime by a lone, probably lone, murderous criminal.
Totally
no, and I think that once we make it... Let me finish, Carol. Once you... It's trying to, but it's reactions like the one you're expressing right now, I feel, that take it a lot closer to being that. This is a lone, murderous criminal who tragically was able to kill 4 people and injure many innocent people, and we should be horrified by that and respectful of it, and we should mourn those who have suffered. We should not become hysterical, and I feel that's
right. You can't, Carol. I'm sorry, you can't, because it's the end, and you're entitled to your feelings. But I have to say, I don't share them. I'm not broken. The police and the emergency services yesterday were swift and brave in response to a cowardly attack on innocents. Palace of Westminster policemen sprinted into harm's way. Paramedics tended to the wounded when the assailant was still at large. A Tory MP, Tobias Ellwood, tried to save the life of an unarmed officer, one of those who had guarded him and other parliamentarians every day. My brother Joe, also a Tory MP, arriving to vote on his bicycle, was bundled into the checkpoint hut by another policeman and told to hide under the desk, and here is his photo. He paid tribute on Twitter. Police saved many, many lives today. Extraordinary response. We should be grateful to all of those who gave assistance, and for this. Terrorism is humanity at its worst, but it can also bring out the best in us.
I couldn't agree more, Rachel. Just this morning, one of the ladies who works here was saying her husband is a police officer, and that last night she was feeling so emotional and didn't want to let go of him, because I think we all forget the risks that people take in working for the police or the security services or even the ambulance staff, which you don't necessarily think of as a life-threatening job, but they do put themselves in daily danger of that kind of risk. You never know when it's going to happen. And to watch the response, it's just remarkable. It does kind of renew your faith in humanity, or even just to see the passers-by just stopping and trying to help those people who were mowed down on the bridge. It is, I think, the best of our country, you know, people coming together, trying to help each other, putting themselves last. And the police officer, Keith Palmer, who died, you know, literally to protect everyone in that house and, you know, what our democracy stands for. It's an unimaginable sacrifice, and I really can't imagine what his family are going through.
MPs and the police, Nick, often get it in the neck, often from us, from journalists. And actually, yesterday was a day when all the professions actually came
I agree.
incredibly well.
There is time for a more sober review of this, but I just wonder if we afforded that police constable enough protection, because you will know better than most of us here, that is the softest point of entry to the Palace of Westminster, because it's where the MPs drive their cars. Why we can't have had those rising bollards that would have been there. So whether...
Well, the rising bollard wouldn't have stopped my brother Joe getting in on his bike, or that man on foot.
So here is this fellow. We know we're at the second highest level of alert in this country. This is, by all measures, one of our most vulnerable buildings, and we have this incredibly brave police officer, and I'm not questioning his bravery, saying he is the first point of contact, really. I would argue that if he doesn't, because you can't mandate police officers, and I know we'll talk about this later, but he clearly didn't want to carry a gun. I respect that. Surely he had to have as his buddy all the time an armed officer. Or we have an armed officer who's your first point. That is what I wonder whether we afforded enough cover to that constable.
Well, I don't know whether the others were armed in that checkpoint.
Well, there were plainclothes guys milling around who were armed. You were talking about the pictures yesterday. I think the ones that got me the most was when you saw passers-by, ordinary people on the bridge, tending the wounded. I mean, I could cry now when I think about it. There was a girl holding a guy's head he was terribly injured. And I think when I talk about people being broken, that's what I'm talking about. Because that girl will never be the same again, but she did it anyway. You know when you walk into that situation, you're never going to be the same again, but you do it anyway. And because none of those people knew if there was going to be a bomb, or if there was going to be something else, or if there was going to be another car, or whatever. And I just, those are the people that got to me, And I got angry after that.
And
I got really angry.
And I think that feeds to what we were saying about that defiant spirit, that I think the thing that I was struck most by was how calm everybody remained. It wasn't pandemonium. People were somehow managed to rally their resolve and work with the security service. Because I can imagine, had I been there, I don't know if I would have responded in such a calm way. And I think that's our point.
There was panic in the beginning when people heard the shots, so you saw people running. But
it
people
was
who saw the injured
well managed. I know a couple of people who were in cars that were stuck in the middle of Westminster, and everybody just remained calm. They were stuck in their cars for a couple of hours and just stayed calm and listened to what the police were saying. And I think that's part of what we were saying in terms of the defiant spirit and what makes us so proud to be British.
What Nick was saying about that being a soft point of entry to the Palace of Westminster, because I think there's a real debate to be had, and I don't know the answer, but I think it is important that our Parliament isn't this closed fortress that's inaccessible. And it's a fact of life here that you walk along that street past the House of Parliament. The officers, if you walk past every day, you say hello to them. They're friendly. You see people coming in and out. You don't get a sense of kind of us and them, the people in there, and us, the public. You feel that it's a building you can go into, and that there's a kind of, it's part of the environment, and I think that's really important. But at the same time, it is troubling that somebody can enter in that way and inflict that kind of assault.
Talking about remaining calm, there was a video that I was so moved by, which was of some school children who were visiting Parliament, and here's them being evacuated from the building. I mean, again, look at that. Unbelievable.
Well, of course, this is what Assistant Commissioner Mark Rowley, who is in charge of the counter-terrorism brief, as he said, which I think was very accurate, this is the day they trained for, and they feared would never happen, but it had to. And I think, allowing for what everybody said, the fact that after the fatal stabbing, the attacker was shot ultimately fatally within maximum 10 seconds. That's how quickly they got. My one concern is that it was too easy at the point of entry. Once he's in the Palace of Westminster, I think we moved pretty... In fact, I don't think you could move any quicker, in all honesty. I really don't see how you could do any better. I just feel it was a bit vulnerable there.
I like what Afua said, and what we see is Westminster is a living community, and it's got this ecology all of its own, with the MPs and the school children and the policemen. And what we saw yesterday was not just people doing their jobs and dying as heroes, but the daily life of that place. It was like, and we can't change that. I don't think we can react to this by saying the shutters have got to come down, we've got to have, assault of police with assault weapons.
If we did
this
do
is
that,
what
we'd
is
be
good about
into
Westminster.
the hands of the terrorists. That's exactly what they want to see.
And also, I mean, the way the MPs responded too, they were calm, they sat. I think we're going to see Grant Shapps and Hilary Benn's reactions, who were both on the estate yesterday.
I was just coming out of the division lobby and was about to turn right, and noticed the doors to the chamber were shut. So I asked what was going on, and they said, well, the attack alarm had gone off. And then shortly thereafter the news came through that there had been an incident, there'd been a stabbing.
Police officers by us, I mean, just pay respect to their enormous professionalism, because they, within moments, were standing there telling us to get out of the way, but actually, in reality, standing there themselves.
Rachel, here's the thing.
Yeah.
We're talking about, I thought Sky News coverage last night was absolutely phenomenal. I've just done 3 hours on the radio. Some of the newspapers did their first 20 pages of tabloid paper, and I agree with all that, I understand it. But are we giving the terrorists too much oxygen with that coverage?
I think this is a really interesting issue, and it harks back to the time when the French media said that they weren't going to put the faces of those who've been guilty of these atrocities on the front pages, which I actually agreed with. Yeah. I think it's debatable. I think that the media becomes a megaphone for atrocities, but don't forget what we will remember is not the name or the face of that attacker who died in the Palace of Westminster yesterday. We will remember the pictures that moved you so much,
and I think, the media have to cover this stuff, because if they don't, social media will, and a load of rubbish will be put out there and people will not know what's happened. But as you say, what social media cannot do, it cannot paint the picture and tell the story about the things we need to know about. The fact that the terror is dead is irrelevant to everyone today. We care about the other people who are dead. We care about the people who are injured. We don't care about him. And the papers have been...
I thought it was interesting yesterday to hear people say, comparing the way this has been reported to the way IRA attacks were reported in the 1980s. And I did hear it said that in those days, when IRA attacks were unleashed on cities like London, they were reported as horrible criminal events that killed and injured people, but that it was in the context of kind of life as usual. Yeah. Whereas now, since 9/11, we report terrorism as something else, as I was saying to Carol, a kind of existential threat, kind of everything stop, hold all the other stories, this is what's going on, and it creates a different level of fear, which does worry me. Now, I'm also not saying that we shouldn't cover this and we shouldn't take it seriously. But it is what they want. They want to make us feel like this is something differently scary.
But this is an existential threat, because it will change the way some people have to live their lives. Anyway, listen, we got to move on. It's more than 24 hours since yesterday's terror attack, and still the shock is raw. But as we struggle to come to terms with what happened, I'm being consumed by a different emotion. My shock is being replaced by an anger so fierce, so visceral, it actually hurts. And I don't think I'm alone. People are angry that one lone lunatic could have caused so much carnage, so much pain. They're angry at being told that we must all just get on and live our lives as normal and not let terrorism change or divide us. Tell that to Keith Palmer's devastated family. Tell it to those catastrophically injured survivors and the people who love them. Their lives have been changed forever, and we are letting them down if we as a society don't change too. I thank God for our police yesterday. I thank God they were armed and able to take out this murderer before he hurt and killed even more people. I'm grateful the instinct of these officers was to run at the danger, not away from it, because God knows every time a copper fires a gun these days, there's an outcry, an inquiry, and his career is on the line. But in a few hellish minutes yesterday, the justification for a bigger, better funded, better armed police force was writ large in the blood of the dead and dying. Make no mistake, what happened at Westminster was an act of war. So I don't want to be told not to be angry, not to be afraid, that the terrorists won't break us. I want us to break them. And I want the people on the front line of this war to be given whatever they say they need to fight it. Oh, God.
I don't even know how to respond to that, Carol. This was a lone lunatic. You said that yourself.
This was a guy who was being investigated for terrorism, for vicious acts of terrorism.
No, let's get this right. He was under surveillance 10 years ago, and he was not under
justifying him.
No, we're not. And he was not under investigation currently, and he was on the peripheries. You cannot say that.
But he tried to kill somebody. But how can you say he's loaned you?
That's not the argument. The argument is our security services have been doing a fantastic job. Think about this. We have not had another attack since 7/7.
12 foiled attacks.
12 foiled attacks.
But this was an Islamist-inspired act. Why weren't people
by one lone madman.
This guy's living on his own and he doesn't have contact with anybody.
Yes.
Do you?
Yes.
Well,
it'll
be interesting to find out.
Because
if
I
that
can
is the
assure
case.
you, if it was what you're suggesting, it would have been far worse. And you yourself have said it could have been far worse. And the fact that it wasn't is because our security services have been doing a fantastic job.
We know you keep on saying that. We know they've done a fantastic job.
No, you have to define an act of war, Carol.
Do you know that at any one time there are 500 operations?
No, wait.
Define
in your cue, you said this was an act of war.
Somebody's stabbing an unarmed policeman on our street.
That's an act
Could that not be a random criminal
You guys
act?
do know, don't you? You do know that there are 500 the security service ongoing investigations that they have foiled so many, so that we are under attack. You don't think this is a war?
Working. What they're doing is working.
Well, it didn't work yesterday
because this is one man. The point is.
Do you seriously believe?
No, the point is, our security services, Carol, are doing such a fantastic job, which is why they have been able to foil the big orchestrated terror attacks.
The terrorist has been trying to hurt us for a very long time.
Arming police would not stop what happened yesterday. No way. How is it going to stop what happened yesterday?
It really disturbs me when I hear you speaking like that, Carol, for a number of reasons. One, speaking about an act of war. One reason is that have we learned nothing from what's happened? Because having a warlike mentality has not protected us from other attacks. I think all of us around this table want the same thing. We want to be safe.
Security
we want to see
peace.
no more killings like this on our streets. That's what we all want. I don't see how the kind of reaction you're having... Did you think that the stabbing of Joe Cox, the serving MP, did you describe that as an act of war?
No.
Well, I can't think of a more serious threat to what we stand for as a country.
We've got to just stop because it's quite an important fact. While I don't agree with you saying an act of war, let's just remind everybody that Islamic State has released a statement calling the attacker a soldier of Islam and suggesting he was inspired by their call to attack coalition states.
But also, all these lone wolves you were talking about, they're the ones the Islamic State love. They actually say that when a lone person commits an act of terrorism like this, it is as dear to them as whatever they're doing in Syria.
My point is your suggestions won't prevent that. Your suggestions of arming police,
it's not going to prevent a war between us and Islamists.
It's not going to prevent a lone wolf. It's not. Tell me how the police being armed would have stopped that man driving into those people.
My whole point isn't about the police being armed.
For a start,
Keith Palmer might still be alive if he'd been armed yesterday. He wasn't armed. So yes, and I think you'll find. I think Norman Brennan, the guy who used to be former Transport Police, he's got something to say here about our police being armed.
One of the biggest concerns I've got is that in London, it is the best protected place probably in the world, comparable to Manhattan in New York, where I've been to many times. What I'm concerned about is anyone that may wish to attack us again, and I'm sure it will happen. We predicted this would happen. What about all the other major cities, where sometimes armed backup could be 10 or 20 minutes away? Now, it's all right London being well protected, and I think this will certainly make many police officers do not want to be armed, that will now reconsider wanting to be armed, and I think that will be one of the priorities for the Metropolitan Commission and the Home Secretary.
That's an interesting point, Nick, isn't it?
You said that give the police whatever they need. Yeah. I mean, looking at those men and women who poured into Palace of Westminster, quite rightly, they had every bit of kit, and I applaud that. I'm not saying that's... Yeah. What else do you want to give them?
But as he says as well, that they are crack squads. Not every officer is armed in the way they are. And Norman Brennan was talking particularly about outside London, where there are nowhere near as many armed police as we have here.
Carol, as we know in America, everyone's armed to the teeth. That didn't prevent 9/11.
No, it didn't.
A year to the day yesterday, the fact that in Belgium and Brussels the police are armed did not prevent the attack on Zaventem and the other bits of Brussels. Yeah. It did not prevent the lorry attack in Nice, where the French policemen are armed. We don't have armed policemen. I think it makes us a better and safer country.
Can I just read you a quote? Can I just read you a quote from Ken Marsh? Can I just read you a quote from Ken Marsh, the MPF chairman? He says, if you take the lorry in Nice, for example, they're driven to crowds of people. My cops are not armed, and they would not have been able to respond like the French police did. So what he's saying is, although many people were killed there would probably have been more had the police not been armed.
He wasn't stopped by armed policemen in Nice.
This is the MPF chairman saying that his officers would not be able to respond on in the same way as the ones in New Zealand.
That's the risk
Do
we
you
live
guys think
with.
Wally should be on?
I want to agree with you about something. The thing I agree with you about, I think, is that we need to invest in our police service. And I think that cuts to policing is something that we should all be doubly re-questioning.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting to hear people who have had operational experience of policing talk about the fact that what really matters in a situation like this is not having more armed police, it's having community policing.
Yeah.
It's about building trust. Because the thing is, we're facing these lone attacks. Just listen to me.
Well,
we're facing these lone attacks,
attacks,
Carol. They don't leave a trace, but there are people in communities who know these people, who notice when people are acting strangely, who, if they had a relationship of trust with the kind of bobbies we used to have on the beat that we said hello to every day, would be more likely to report something they would now to phone up Scotland Yard or some phone number.
There are communities in Birmingham where this guy lived and where he was arrested.
It's acknowledged that we have cut community policing and that is one of the biggest threats to that kind of relationship of trust.
I think we should have a look at what Theresa May had to say on this in terms of the commitments that she's planning.
Following the 2015 Strategic Defence and Security Review, we protected the police budgets for counter-terrorism and committed to increase cross-government spending on counter-terrorism by 30% in real terms over the course of this Parliament. And over the next 5 years, we will invest an extra £2.5 billion in building our global security and intelligence network, employing over 1,900 additional staff at MI5, MI6 and GCHQ, and more than doubling our global network of counter-terrorism experts, working with priority countries across Europe, the Middle East, Africa and Asia.
So what else do you want? What else?
Do you think she wouldn't be doing that if she didn't think that we were at war with Islamist terrorists? Do you think they would be putting that kind of money into counter-terrorism if there wasn't a problem?
My point is she's doing what's necessary, so I don't understand what
so
you're
it is
saying.
Necessary.
You're saying that there needs to be more than that. What else?
You guys were just saying it wasn't necessary. I'm saying it absolutely is necessary. The cops have to be given exactly what they need.
We were saying the extras that you're asking for in terms of arming our police isn't going to help.
But Carol, how can we be at war with terrorism? You're sounding like George W. Bush. How could we're
not good.
No, I'm glad you see that point I'm making. We have to. I think it was underscore Rachel's point, and it's interesting. Everyone keeps saying it's a lone wolf. It's a lone wolf. You actually look back at the perpetrators of the Nice and Berlin attack. Actually, they had informers who helped them. So we don't know, and it's very, very early days, and it may be weeks before we actually know the full truth. But what we have is a random, horrific, hideous, criminal act that is not as if, thank the Lord, this is a pattern that we see played out on the streets.
It is part of a pattern, Nick. It is part of a pattern that we're seeing all over Europe.
We're going to leave that there. I'm after the break, urging us to take a considered response to these attacks, to preserve the values that make our democracy strong. Horrific attack caused not just tragic deaths and injuries, a tragedy for everyone involved. It was also a tragedy for the nation. The targets were not just innocent people, but the heart of our democracy. This is the ultimate prize for our enemies, stopping the country from working and threatening the values we so greatly prize. In the past, our panic and desire to find a quick and easy narrative has led us to react to attacks in a way that have caused us as many problems as they have solved. We've responded by demonising whole communities and enacting policies and laws that undermine our civil liberties. It's too soon to say how this was able to happen. That will come. But it's absolutely the right time to try to keep a clear head, look at the evidence as we get it, and act upon it. We need to protect our people, our landmarks and infrastructure, as our emergency services did so bravely, but we also need to protect our values.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be in accord with a lot of what you just said. One thing that I wrote down as you were talking, Alpha, that in the past we've enacted laws and policies that were retrograde. What were some of those?
So if you think about some of the counter-terror legislation after 9/11, for example, so pre-charge detention without evidence for 14 days, control orders for 22 hours a day, even the recent Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, which allows the government to use prerogative powers to withdraw passports, the new surveillance powers that are being used that have been described as the most extreme in the Western world. Now, when it comes to surveillance powers, We don't know enough about this to know whether that is relevant, would have been able to prevent attacks if this person, and he may have already been under the surveillance of the authorities. But the point I'm making is that we need to question. We need to question whether the legal regime, and I think actually the laws we've got now on the whole are much more reasonable and appropriately used. But in the past, I think we have overreacted. We've had to repeal a lot of that legislation, and it's affected many of us who are innocent and have no connection to terrorism in a way I personally think is unjustified.
We have some of the most restrictive surveillance in the whole of the Western world. Who's put that out there?
A number of people have said that. The civil liberties group, Liberty.
Well, okay, isn't that? I'm not saying that Liberty doesn't have a purpose.
They're not the only ones.
No, okay, but I mean that does rather colour or shade the comments, doesn't it, a little bit? Because you could file it under that. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? I mean, it's interesting. I think that the measures you pulled out, yes, there are a couple there that were a little bit too far. And I don't subscribe to the if you've got nothing to hide, why should you worry? I think that is absolutely wrong. You don't want an overarching state. But I do think that some of the trade-off we have to give, and we're talking when the inquiries are still going on, is that we will have to accept a greater degree of surveillance and intrusion in our lives. I think we have
We've already accepted it. So, now the authorities are allowed to listen to our phone calls, collect our email correspondence and hold it for up to a year. And in defence of that law, it's been happening for ages, and now it's just being made more transparent. So I don't disagree making it transparent.
Do you not think the world is changing, and it would be perverse in the extreme not to allow the authorities to do what they need to do, to listen in to our phone calls, to go to our emails, to go into our Instagrams and Facebooks, to do whatever they have to do? Because, a lot of libertarians find scrutiny an affront. I find the slaughter of innocents an affront, and I think whatever has to be done to stop that happening, we should be doing it. And for me, to lose the fact that my emails might be private, I don't actually care. If we don't know that it couldn't have stopped yesterday, we don't know that. But every time something happens where the authorities try to make us safer, they say, by taking away some of our civil liberties, there's an outcry. We've got to stop that. You've got to realise the threat is out there. Let me just give you these stats again. Let's just run these stats by us again. 13 potential terror attacks have been disrupted since 2013. The threat level remains severe. More than 500 investigations into terror plots are running at any one time. And in the past year, the anti-terror police hotline received 22,000 calls from members of the public. That's twice as many as the year before. So the threat is there. And the thing is, we were saying before this was an isolated attack, but it's part of a pattern, and you cannot separate the two.
So what I would say to that, Carol, and I'll then bring others in, is that, first of all, I don't want this to be a discussion about whether we allow our intelligence service agencies to have the powers they need to stop attacks, because I'm pretty sure we all agree that we do. None of us want to live under the threat of constant attack. None of us want to see this happening on any of our streets. So that's a given. I'm saying we need to be questioning the powers that they have, and we need to avoid any knee-jerk reaction enacting new draconian policies, because what we've done in the past is make assumptions. We haven't looked at the actual evidence as to what is happening. When it comes to these kinds of attacks, we've made lots of mistakes in the assumed profiles of the people who carry these out. For example, many of them are not people who are immigrants to this country. Many of them are people who are from this country. Many of them get radicalised very quickly. And what we've done, we've all been very abstract about this. In the past, we have enacted policies in a way that have actually demonised the entire Muslim community. Now, our contest strategy at the moment, which is the umbrella of policies around preventing and detecting terrorism, the principles, again, I'm sure we all agree with, but the way that some of them have been carried out have demonised communities. And I just want to bring in a clip from Mark Rowley, who brought this up in what he said last night.
Terrorists have a clear aim. That is to create discord, distrust, and to create fear. The police stand with all communities in the UK and will take action against anybody who seeks to undermine society, especially where their crimes are motivated by hate. We must recognise now that our Muslim communities will feel anxious at this time, given the past behaviour of extreme right-wing groups, and we will continue to work with all community leaders over coming days.
June, you wanted to say something?
I completely agree with you, Afua, and I think also, at the end of the day, we also need to make sure that we protect our citizens from the state as well, because at the end of the day, it's fine when you've got a government in place that is actually ethical and is moral. But I, for one, would not want to be living in America right now with somebody like a Donald Trump with that kind of information. So at the same time, we also need to make sure, Carol, that we do, as Afua is saying, remain sensible about this stuff.
Rachel?
I think Mark Rowley spoke for me when he said that, you know, the aim of the terrorists is to create fear and to break Carol Malone, which they were very successful. Joe Cox's husband, Brendan, said that the attacker no more stood for the Muslim community than... Sorry, the attacker yesterday no more stood for the Muslim community than the man who killed his wife, Jo, stood for the citizens, the good people of North Yorkshire. I agree about knee-jerk legislation. I remember the Dangerous Dogs Act that I think had to be repealed in the wake of some attacks by staffies. Yes, we don't want to rush into this. But I think, you know, your emails my emails aren't worth reading. What worries me about this constant surveillance is that it's a bit like CCTV. Who's actually going to review all the emails? Who's going to look at the footage? I'm much more interested in that figure that there were 22,000 calls to community hotlines. What we need in this country is not the war on terror and talk about that, but have an army of citizen policemen who report everything back to the authorities if they... So we just keep our eyes and ears open as we go about our business.
That's the Stasi.
No, it's not, Nick. But if you have some loner...
with you, Rachel.
Wait, Rachel.
Nelly said lunatic.
No, what I'm saying is everybody's got to go about their business with their eyes open. And the police need our help because we don't want it to be all about the police. We're all in charge.
I think Nick hasn't come in.
Go on, Nick. What do you mean? What's wrong?
Can I just pick your
wrong with ringing
Nick hasn't come in yet, and I think he needs to.
And then can I say one thing?
He's looking very confused.
I've never seen such shock as we saw on the face of Afra.
Why can't citizens be alert? That's what I'm saying.
Describe the difference between that and effectively almost like a Stasi-like force.
Completely misunderstanding.
We should celebrate the fact, as Carol's just told us, that the number of calls to this anti-terror hotline has increased. We should be absolutely aware and absolutely sorry. This man doesn't represent Muslims. It's a very narrow... No. So again, and we've been in accord for most of this today's show. But that, I have to file under knee-jerk reaction. We need a civilian police force.
I wonder if Rachel maybe didn't mean to make it sound like she wanted everyone to start spying on each other.
I'm going to have to interrupt you, unfortunately, and bring your brilliant debate to a close, because after the break, it's me, and I'll be reflecting on the service of our MPs and the key role they play in preserving our democracy. I know a lot of MPs who were under lockdown in the Commons, but they were back at work the next day, doing their job less than 24 hours after members of the public and Parliament itself were attacked. I also knew the MP Jo Cox, who was murdered outside her constituency office in June last year. I know MPs who've had their homes attacked. Many also deal with death threats and online trolls on a regular basis. Our MPs do a fantastic job, and I think it's time we give them more credit for their bravery and dedication. Be it hypocrisy, greed, pay scandals, whatever, let's stop bad-mouthing our MPs and start saying thank you for the job they do for us.
Totally and utterly agree with you. It's, you know, I think, and this is not unusual. MPs are regularly at the heart of terror and have been for decades. You know, the Brighton bomb when the IRA was around,
Norman Tebbit,
and more recently Jo Cox. And it's, you know, and I just think what's happened in the past couple of years, with social media or whatever, the abuse they're getting is appalling. If I was an MP, if I was especially a female MP in the Commons today, I would find it very, very hard to go on, because it is appalling what happens. And I even noticed that on Twitter yesterday, were having a go. But you look at Tobias Ellwood, what he did yesterday. I mean, my heart was going to burst. And you kind of. We could all see that poor policeman had died, but what he was doing to try and save him, he was covered in blood. His suit was covered in blood.
Ran into the face of danger.
And he ran there, and he didn't care. He just was going to do what he had to do. And I do think our MPs do an incredible job. And I think yesterday we saw that with a lot of them. And they're all in your face today. They're all back there. They're all doing what they're supposed to be doing. And
And one of the things I think we all should be doing is calling up our local MP
and saying,
to thank
saying thank you. You're right.
Yeah. I think it kind of goes to the debate we were having before about how should Westminster protect itself, you know, and the idea that we don't want it to become this closed fortress. It's the same with our MPs. I mean, they really are very vulnerable on one level.
Very vulnerable.
They completely make themselves open to the public. They hold surgeries. They're out and about.
Without security.
And it's so important that they do, because that is how our democracy works. But things like this do remind you, actually, that they are taking a huge risk in doing that, and it's not something that we usually think about, you know. So I think this was also a reminder of that.
Nick, just to add, I have an MP friend who's often been trolled online, and last year somebody tried to break into his house. They managed to get in, and thank God the police came in time, and so he now has bomb-proof windows, and his children have to have somebody to, you know, keep an eye on them because the kids were in the house when it happened.
Well, of course, all of that is absolutely wrong, and what you said is right, but let's just wind it back a little bit. I mean, not all of the ones who are currently serving, but they were the authors of the lack of respect in which we viewed them, if you go back to that appalling expenses scandal. Now, I know many of those have subsequently gone, and indeed some of them have faced criminal charges, but the reason that they dropped so badly in public esteem was because, in some instances, not all, they were crooks.
But fact. But my point is, when it comes to the way we report the behaviour of MPs, the behaviour of a few, unfortunately, tarnishes the many. And actually, if you're looking at the expenses scandal, that was, what, maybe 5% at the most, 5-10%? But yet, it somehow tarnished the whole group. And I think you're right, Jo Cox's murder did begin to change that, but it shouldn't take things as serious as this for us to appreciate the work that they do. That's all I'm saying. It is, and even the argument about how much they're paid, I think they deserve that salary. Well, Rachel, you have so many members of your family.
So many. Multiple MP relations.
You mentioned your brother got caught up in it yesterday. I mean, how's that affected your family?
Joe really was arriving just as the attack was taking place, and my mother is anxious at the best of times, didn't have a happy afternoon.
No.
But, you know, the other thing we have to remember is what's going on in France, which is all these, the politicians are tumbling because it's shown they are, you know, paying their relatives. And actually, we do have a bit of that here, but we're cracking down on that as well. I think that after the next election, 150 MPs actually employ their own nearest and dearest, you know, their wives and their daughters and their sons as parliamentary assistants and office managers. And I think that that's going to go, and I think we're going to see a much more, as it were, strictly professional MP class, which is also good. And I think you're right. I think they probably should be possibly paid a lot more, although 70,000 or whatever it is they're paid is a very good salary.
It's a good salary. It's not a good salary in London, I guess, if you've got a family and the rest of it. But, you know, we're talking about, Nick's talking about, you know, the expenses. That's greed, that's one thing, and that is a kind of a box. The other box is that they do face every single day. You know, when they go in the surgeries now, the world is changing, and it's not like it used to be 10 years ago. You would have thought you were going to get knifed in your surgery, but that does happen now, and it has happened. And I just think,
abused.
And
or abused.
Kind of
I mean, because
the level of abuse has changed. And yes, you're right. It is partly because of what they've done.
Because physical violence is one thing that's fortunately still rare, but the abuse, the verbal abuse that many of them receive on a daily basis. You're right.
We see what they're
not at the risk of re-inflaming, you know, the whole row we've been having today.
Don't talk about the war.
It's funny you should say that. No, because Carol, you know, I'm listening to you talking about the threat that our MPs face, with which I completely agree, and it's making me think, why have you singled out this incident as this act of war when the fact is that all kinds of people who, for whatever reason, criminal, deranged, unstable, are attacking MPs, both physically and on social media? And these are all attacks.
You seem to not accept that we are under a massive threat. It's like you're not seeing it. And what I'm saying is, I think
if you've listened to what I'm saying, I haven't denied that.
One moment. I have a clip of what happened yesterday in Westminster when it was announced that they had been attacked.
Inside Parliament, 2 hours after Prime Minister's questions, a clerk ran into the chamber with the news.
I am now going to suspend the sitting of the House. This House is now suspended, but please wait here.
MPs and parliamentary staff gathered in Central Lobby, where an armed officer struck an incongruous figure. They filled ancient Westminster Hall, checking their phones for information as the lockdown continued.
Yeah.
it was just a plea for me to have some context here. There are different threats against our public servants, all of which I think we should take extremely seriously. Yeah. And I think we should look at it in the round, and we shouldn't overreact about any single one of them, but we should take them all seriously and respect the people who face them and work out, based on a rational, evidence-based approach, what we can do to prevent them.
Of course, but for me, the reason why I wanted to talk about this particular issue is I think we have to start really... what the Americans do very well is they respect everything that Washington stands for. Obviously, Donald Trump is not doing a great job of maintaining that at the moment. But I think we actually, as a country, need to respect the symbol of Westminster much more and value what our MPs do on a daily basis. It's too easy to abuse MPs.
I think this is a better crop. A much better crop than they were 6, 7, 8 years ago.
I don't know if I would agree with the comparison, though. I mean, draining the swamp, it didn't sound to me like Americans were feeling at their most respectful.
Yeah, but look at who was
Washington.
Yeah, but look at who was saying that.
People hate Trump because he seems to be defiling what their government stands for,
which is a respectable institution.
We ought to have
for the most part.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are nearing the end of the show, but before we go, let's listen to the Prime Minister's tribute to PC Keith Palmer, the police officer, husband and father who was killed as he stood guard outside Parliament.
PC Palmer had devoted his life to the service of his country. He had been a member of the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command for 15 years and a soldier in the Royal Artillery before that. He was a husband and a father, killed doing a job he loved. He was every inch a hero, and his actions will never be forgotten.
Hear. Amazing. And I just want to say I think Theresa May has been brilliant throughout this. She really has. Well, that's it for this week. We will be back with plenty more to discuss next week. So take care. Bye.
Provocative. Straight talking. Fairness. Provocative. Straight talking.